there's a tendency to act like he couldn't possibly be having real problems, like wanting friends, like wanting more family support, like being lonely. Yes, he can't control his nervous system, but it's a nervous system overreacting to real feelings that most kids would be having. And even though most kids wouldn't act this way in response to those feelings, his nervous system does act this way in response to those feelings, which is the way that I see him. He can't tell me what those feelings are, but I look in his eyes. I know he's feeling more than he can say, and he has ways of communicating with me about things that I understand to be more. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Um, Here's another video following up on how things are going with us. So if you haven't been here before, this is Parenting Through ASD, or Autism Spectrum Disorder. And my name is Wendy. This is a series of videos about me as a parent, parenting a severely autistic 15-year-old boy. I am a developmental psychologist and a parent to a severely autistic, almost 15-year-old boy. And I have been doing some videos. Some of them are about tips and just things in the literature in psychology, developmental psychology, autism parenting, autism, what we know about it. And some of them lately have been about just me as a parent and trying out some of the things in the literature as we struggle through sort of this new stage in my son's development. And we have been struggling because I think some professionals don't have a lot of experience as children get older or young adults get older. I think there's also a sort of mentality that at a certain age, they have sort of met the threshold for intervening in growth. And there's not a whole lot you can do to continue to intervene on that trajectory of development. And I think there's also just a lack of experience. There's a level of discomfort that starts to sort of show up. And you just kind of find yourself as a parent alone at this sort of place in your child's growth. So we're trying to figure all that out. How do we do this pretty much alone now? There's social groups. There are programs focused on like vocational development and independent living and things like that. There's not a lot of things focused on behavior. There's not a lot of things focused on intellectual growth. My son is smart, still capable of learning, and he's bored and he's frustrated and all kinds of things that he's going through. And it leads to behavior issues for a myriad of reasons. So we're trying to figure it out. And these videos are kind of a way of us trying to find our way through that. As I read about things and learn about, what do other psychologists think about behavior? What do psychologists think about parenting through autism? What might that look like in real life? Because let's face it, a lot of this stuff is academic. A lot of this stuff works in theory, but what happens when we try to make it work in real life, especially when you don't have people helping you through it? I've been talking in the last few videos about co-regulation and how much that has changed with my son's age. At my son's age, he wants to be independent. And in a lot of cases, he wants to do the opposite of what we are doing. Not unlike other teenagers, right? So setting the example for him doesn't work like it does when they're younger. And you keeping yourself regulated is a little bit about managing your own frustration when they're younger. It's a little bit about you maybe being tired and trying to manage your own tiredness in that moment and showing up gracefully and patiently. And in our situation, with my son being larger, almost my size, and definitely stronger than me, some of that is managing my fear of him, managing not only my frustration, but also my anger with him for not listening, for not trying harder when I know that he can, when I know that he's capable of more. for giving up on me and himself because I know that he can do more. But I know he's being rebellious. I feel those complicated emotions about him now that aren't as simple as, my toddler doesn't know better. But my son, even though he has severe autism, I know he knows better and I know he can do better. And I also know that he is giving up on what he can do because he's being rebellious and he is showing me that he's his own person. But because he's autistic, his way of giving up turns into violent, aggressive behavior. So I feel frustrated with him in a different way, and I feel angry with him in a different way than when they're younger kids. And I have to manage that kind of dysregulation in myself, and I have to manage my fear of him and all of those things that seem so much simpler when they're younger and a moment becomes dysregulated, become much more complicated and intense in a way that I hope other families don't have to feel, but might. And there is not help for those very intense moments. Um, it's very important for me to learn what that moment needs. And I am trying so hard to figure that out because co regulation isn't working the way that it used to, and especially with him and his personality. Um, and his personality right now is all over the place, as he figures himself out, just like any teenager is trying to do in these moments, in these ages. Um, So anyway, some of the things I've been learning about are trying to figure out your cues in your own body that you are becoming dysregulated. What are the things that happens inside you that give you a cue that you're about to show him that you're losing control of the situation because he can read you. They can read you. And the moment they start to read you, escalation occurs. And especially my son, he has superpowers about people's moods, people's feelings, the thing that people refer to as being an empath. Um, that's him. But it's not being an empath, it is an uncanny ability to read the slightest twitch in a person's face, the slightest change in muscle tension, in breath, a shift in somebody's body, anything that's out of the ordinary, and he can pick up on it. And some people think that when they can do that kind of thing, they're empaths, and he can do that kind of thing. That's one of his autism superpowers, and he can do it with anyone, not just me. But in those particular moments, it's a terrible thing for him to be able to do because he knows before I do that I'm about to lose control of a situation. So being able to know that in myself is key in a moment that calls for co-regulation. And the other thing that I've been reading about that's really important is when you do lose it in a moment, not lose it in a way where things become heated or violent or whatever on my behalf, because they never do, but that I show my hand to him, that I show him I've become afraid, or I show him that I have become angry or tense in any way, that I'm able to come back to center quickly, that I'm able to come to a place of steadiness quickly, um, which is more probably important because the fact of the matter is, one, I am human. So the possibility of becoming dysregulated is high. It's likely. And two, under the conditions in which we live, we're always tense. We're always in a moment of chaos, pretty much, in this house. There's always something going on. There's always something that could be happening with my son, with school, with health, with work, with finances. There's always a pressure point, and any one of those pressure valves is going off at a moment's notice. And under those conditions, you are always walking a tightrope, so you're likely to dysregulate quickly. What's more important is that you can find steady again more quickly than that. Um, so that's the more likely scenario, is that you will become dysregulated as the parent. And what's most important is that you can come back to center quickly. And I think that's what I've been working on most, because I do become afraid of my son quickly, which means I become dysregulated and he becomes aware of that dysregulation, and that spins him out. He immediately senses my fear. And even if that isn't, if his response to my fear isn't always violence, he does become dysregulated in a way that he becomes emotional, or he becomes anxious and nervous in response to my fear, or he becomes sad and doesn't know what to do with the fact that I'm afraid of him. And still, that becomes a dysregulation for him. Later on, he will become violent or aggressive after he becomes nervous or after he becomes sad. Um, so I have to immediately regulate if I become in any way dysregulated, in order to bring everything back to steady, in order to be able to show up for him, in order to let him know I'm okay, in order to bring everybody else back to center. So I wanted to talk through those things a little bit, just to kind of show what it's been like in the house and trying to work through the things that I'm hoping will be helpful tools for at least me as I work with him through his behaviors. But that's just a piece of it. At the same time, I'm trying to figure out what he needs, why he is behaving the way that he is. And, you know, we have gone for help in a few places, and everybody treats it so behaviorally with him. Everybody wants to address the behavior regardless of what's going on inside him that causes the behavior. And it comes from such an outdated point of view that he couldn't possibly be having deep thoughts and emotions that lead to his behaviors. There is just this Pavlovian, he doesn't have real cognitive function. He is just an animal acting out kind of approach to autism that makes me sick to my stomach, even with well educated psychologists in some of the best facilities available to us and to the rest of the world, because we live in a really well educated area of the country. And I can't believe that's still the way that people act in response to him and his behavior. So I manage a lot of what happens with him in our home, because I seem to be one of the few people that sees him as more. There's a tendency to act like he couldn't possibly be having real problems, like wanting friends, like wanting more family support, like being lonely, like missing something in his life, you know? In everybody's eyes that we try to seek counsel with, he just can't control his nervous system. And he is acting violently because he's basically an animal with no control of himself. Not because he might be feeling things. Yes, he can't control his nervous system, but it's a nervous system overreacting to real feelings that most kids would be having. And even though most kids wouldn't act this way in response to those feelings, his nervous system does act this way in response to those feelings, which is the way that I see him. He can't tell me what those feelings are, but I look in his eyes. I know he's feeling more than he can say, and he has ways of communicating with me about things that I understand to be more. So it feels like so much falls on me, because so few people see him as more than what's on the surface. He's a kid acting out. Yeah. Any other kid acting out would be having emotional problems, which sounds cliche, but it's real. At least they would see him as like a real person and a real kid having real ideas about things. And they might belittle the fact that emotional problems are a real thing, but they would see it for what it is. With my son, they don't even see it for what it is. They just see a body responding to an environment, and they don't see a brain and a heart behind that body. So that's me. I have to do that. I have to see that brain and that heart, and I have to try to figure out what I can do besides the behavioral approaches that people provide some support with. barely any, I have to understand him as a whole person. Like, I know that he's wanting to know more about his culture. Like, he'll watch videos in Spanish and he will practice Spanish speaking words. And when I make Mexican food, he gets real excited and he wants to try it, even though he doesn't always like it. And sometimes it's too spicy for him. And he gets so excited about grandma and grandpa when he talks to them. And I know that he's missing something and he wants to know more about it. And he is doing his best to try and communicate that. And when I show him little things, he gets so interested in it. And that's his way of saying, I want to know more about that part of me and our family. And it makes perfect sense for the age that he's in. That's when I got really interested in what it meant to be Latino and started doing advocacy in the community and all of that stuff. And it's exactly what a 15-year-old kid would be going through right now. It makes perfect sense, but nobody else translates those behaviors into his age and into what he wants to be doing right now, learning more about his community and his culture, because he can't speak and he's autistic and he couldn't possibly be going through what other kids his age would be going through. How could he? And he sees other kids and he will see them walking in groups and talking and laughing and he will just stare. And I see that longing, like, why can't that be me, in his face? And he will literally watch them. And then he'll say something like, I want to go to the trampoline park. Because I know that when he goes there, he's around other kids, even if he can't talk to them or actually be with them. He knows that there's other kids there and that they're all jumping at the same time, even if they're not talking to him or hanging out with him. That's his way of being around other kids. And he will always do that. Whenever he sees other kids hanging out together and he stares at them for a while, then he'll say something like, I want to go to the mall, or I want to go to the trampoline park, or I want to go to the arcade. And I know that he just realized that he doesn't have any friends and he wants to go be where other people his age are just so he can be around them. And I can translate that. I know that means that he wants to be around other people his age and he can't say, why don't I have any friends? Or I want to go hang out with people my age. He can't say it, but he did say it in his own way, you know. And all those things are why he's behaving the way he's behaving, because he's lonely, because he can't communicate, because he can't tell us what he needs, because he's burned out of trying so hard, because he is sad about all the things that he can't do and say, because he's angry. But nobody else can help him with that because nobody else sees him as a whole person like I do. So I keep reading about stuff and I keep trying to figure out, how do I get myself together so that I can keep showing up for him, so that I can keep trying to understand him and be there for him, because nobody else is going to be there for him if I don't be the best mom and psychologist that I can be, so that I can keep being his partner in this life. Because I don't want to leave him alone the way that everybody else does. Because I feel his anger too. All right, well, I've been depressing enough for one day. Listen, I talk a lot about his behavior problems and how much we're trying to work through them, but he is a great kid and he is super smart and he does a lot of cool things that we try to support too. You know, he has a lot of interests. He bounces around because he's really ADHD. So he's interested in some things for about 2 days and then he's interested in something else. But we work on things that he's good at too. And I don't want to make it seem like all we ever do is focus on his bad behaviors, because he's also a really good kid, even though he's going through some bad spells right now more often than not. So anyway, sorry guys, my video cut out, but I guess the point was that it just kind of falls on us to figure out how to work with Lev in a way that honors him as a whole person. But he's also a wonderful kid with a lot of strengths, and we really lean into those strengths too in our parenting. And I'll talk about that in some of the future videos because we do a lot of things to try to pull on threads of the things that he's interested in and the things that bring him joy, and try to build on skills for things that he really likes to do that might be windows into skills or activities that will sustain him more as he gets older. He's loved cooking, and we've been trying to build on that, even though it can be a sensory challenge for him because some of the equipment and things aren't always his favorite. But um, I'll talk about some of those things too in the future. But I had started this conversation around co-regulation challenges, and I thought it was so important because I see so much online about co-regulation, and I hear so much about it among other parents, and I just really wanted to talk about how that changes as you get older. And that's been such a part of our life and what we've been trying to do differently with him, that I wanted to bring a little bit more conversation around that, just because, it can be so different. And I don't think I understood what that was going to look like for us. I didn't want to leave that hanging. And I think it will continue to come up, but I will also bring in some other conversation around things like his strengths and how we try to lean into them. Some of the other things that I have talked about in other videos, like our parenting style. I've noticed a lot how permissive I am and how I've been. I talked about parenting styles, and one of the parenting styles is being permissive. And I fully admit that I am completely a permissive parent. And I think now that he is a teenager, I realize the trap that I laid for myself being so permissive. I have set no boundaries because I was so permissive for so long. And now trying to undo that parenting style with a 15-year-old boy who expects to always get his way has created a set of problems that I am working through also. So that's probably something that I will start to talk more about. Anyway, I'll wrap this video up now, and there'll be more to come. So if you want to comment on any of this kind of stuff, or have questions or thoughts, or totally hate what I'm talking about and why I'm talking about it, or anything else you want to say, drop a comment below and join me if you want to have some more discussion about this kind of stuff. I'll be back with more videos soon. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you soon.